open heart and an open mind. In your name, amen.
Amen. Good morning, family. How are you doing? Good. My name is Zach. I help to lead Soul Purpose, our youth group here at Norwood Park. And this morning, I get the blessing of preaching God's word so that we can all learn together. So I asked you how you're doing. Usually the response that I get when I ask someone, how are you? Typically the response is, oh, hey, Zach, I'm doing good. I'm tired, but I'm doing good. Or I'm really busy, but you know, it's all good. You do what you got to do. And I think that's usually the response I give to people too. I'm a grad student, so I got lots of classes, and it wears me down. And so when people ask me how I'm doing, I say, I'm tired, but I'm good. And I think that indicates something about where we're all at, right? We could all we've heard that as well. And I think that shows that most of us in this room, most of us listening right now, are tired. We're weary. We're worn out. And we're worn out by different things. Some of us are worn out by the jobs that we work. They're not life-giving. They drain us. And we feel like they sap all of our energy. Some of us are worn out by the people that we have to deal with, whether it's at work or even at home. Some of us are worn out by the news and by social media and the things we see there. Some of us are worn out by our failures, our constant attempts to set goals, but to fail to achieve them. Some of us are worn out by our inability to connect with God in what feels like a meaningful way. Did you know that 7 in 10 out of 10 Americans drink coffee every week, and 62% drink coffee every day? Who of you have had a cup of coffee today? At least one. Yeah, we're on the rise. The average American coffee drinker drinks just over 3 cups of coffee per day. I think that just goes to support what I was saying. We're tired, we're weary, and we're looking for some way to fix it. We're looking for a way to avoid it. We're looking for a way to say, oh yeah, I'm doing good, when we're actually completely exhausted. Our bodies and our souls are tired, and we're grouchy because of that. But what if there's a better way to move through life? What if I told you that God has something set in place for us so that we don't have to always be walking around drained, dependent upon caffeine to be a good person? What if there was something that God had established for us so that we could constantly be refueled to bring life into the world? Here at New Life, we've been moving through a series on the 10 Commandments. Each week, we've taken a different commandment and preached through it. This morning, I get to preach on the commandment that we break possibly the most, or at least the most boldly. We break this commandment proudly, and that's the 4th commandment, the commandment to keep a Sabbath day of rest, to cease work for a day and to rest. And so I've titled my sermon, Rest Up or Get Messed Up. Because what we've seen is that if we move through life constantly moving and going and doing and achieving and working, we find ourselves drained and we find ourselves getting messed up. So this title, it's not a threat, rest up or get messed up. It's just a fact that this is how we function. And so our big idea today is that while the world works itself to death, we can find life in godly rest. While the world works itself to death, we can find life in godly rest. So you see this commandment that we're speaking of today. We've been talking about how the commandments are not just a set of rules to become a good person. The commandments have a context of relationship with God. So the commandments that we're going to read today, they were spoken originally to the people of God in the Old Testament, the nation of Israel. But just because these commandments are in the Old Testament does not mean that they don't apply to us today. Because look at this, the Israelites. So the commandments are in Exodus chapter 20, if you'd like to turn there. Exodus chapter 20. And in Exodus, at the beginning of Exodus, the Israelites are in Egypt. And they're enslaved to Pharaoh. And they're working. And they're subjected to back-breaking labor without opportunity to rest, without opportunities to worship their God and to have that relationship. And so they cry out to God because they're weary and they're feeling the weight of this work. And then God hears their cry for help and then rescues them. He liberates them from their bondage to this work. And he brings them into the wilderness and he says, guys, I've rescued you. I'm going to bring you to a land where you can live and enjoy rest. You can enjoy blessing there. But first you got to get there. We got to walk through this wilderness. So the commandments are given to a people who have just come out of slavery, right? They were 400 years in slavery. That's not something that just goes away in a day, right? You don't just abolish slavery and then everything's fine. We know that from our history, right? Slavery is something that leaves its mark. And it's trauma that can be felt through generations. And so we're looking at a weary, tired people that God is coming to. And at the beginning of the commandments, God starts the commandments by saying in verse 2, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. So he's putting this all these commandments in the context of, I am your God and I rescued you to bring you into relationship with myself. So these commandments are not just rules to follow, to checklist them. These are commandments that lead to life in the context of relationship with God, with people, and with the creation that God has made. All right, so this command that we have to the Israelites also speaks to the situation we're in. We're tired like the Israelites. We're weary like the Israelites. We're longing for rest like the Israelites. But the question is, in my big idea, we say we can find life in godly rest. The question is, what does godly rest look like? And why should we rearrange our lives to make room for it? So our first main point this morning is that we should set apart a Sabbath day of rest to cease from our wearying work. That's step one in observing a Sabbath. Cease from our wearying work. So this is what the commandment says. Exodus chapter 20, verses 8 through 11. Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you, nor your son or daughter, nor your male or female servants, nor your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea and all that is in them, but he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. So what does it mean to remember the Sabbath and to make it holy? First of all, clearly said in this passage, right? The Sabbath day establishes a rhythm of work and rest. Work and rest, work and rest. You work for 6 days, you rest for 1 day. This is what it was for Israel. And they celebrated this on Friday evening to Saturday evening because their day started in the evening time. So Sabbath, and you may know some Jewish people today who still observe Sabbath in that way. Sabbath begins after work on Friday and then ends the next day on Saturday. But it's this idea that there is supposed to be a rhythm of work and rest. It's not all supposed to be work. it's not all supposed to be rest. There are two sides here. Because on one hand, the Lord made people to work, right? We're meant to work. We're meant to create and produce and to contribute to society. That's what he made Adam and Eve for, right? Initially, he placed them in the garden and he said, cultivate this land. Care for it. Guard it. Keep it. Bring it into blessing and make it something beautiful. So kind of inherent in this command to keep a Sabbath is a command to work. We're supposed to work. But the word Sabbath itself means to cease or to stop. And so the Sabbath breaks into that work segment of our lives to give us a chance to rest, to breathe, and to be rejuvenated. So the first point I want to make is that our work is not bad. Our work is not bad because God made us in some way to have the capacity to work. But something happened in the garden, right? Something happened with Adam and Eve. When they sinned, they introduced sin into the world and the curse that came along with that. And so God told Adam that because you sinned, there are repercussions that go just beyond yourself. The ground itself is cursed. And so the work that you do will be toilsome. It'll be difficult work. The fruit that the ground bears will not match the amount of effort you put into the work to bring it about. So there's this thing that's now in the way of our ability to work well, and it results in us becoming fatigued and weary and exhausted and not enjoying full blessing. So that means even though some of us have good jobs and we enjoy our work, that good work still drains us and still tires us. And what happens when we start to get tired? When we get tired, it can start to, it almost infiltrates us. If you've ever seen the movie The Lord of the Rings, the first one, the Fellowship, well, I guess the whole series, which I'm learning that most people nowadays have not. Like, I hang out with the youth group and no one's seen Lord of the Rings. It used to be a classic. But in the Lord of the Rings, there's a ring. And this ring is not just an ordinary ring, it's a powerful ring. It's a ring that brings power with it. And so this ring was created to exercise this power, but the problem is that this power corrupts the person who wears the ring. And so this ring has caused all kinds of wars and destruction across the world as people have been fighting and looking for this ring. And so the ring ends up with a guy named Frodo, and his goal is to go and destroy the ring. But he has to carry the ring in order to destroy it. And so what happens when people wear the ring, and throughout the movie you see this, when he wears the ring, and when it's close to him, he starts to become bitter, and he starts to become selfish, and all he wants to do is protect the ring and not let anyone come near it. And he starts lashing out at people around him because this thing is corrupting him. It's making him not his full self or his best self or his true self. So in a similar way, the curse of sin has taken our work and infiltrated it so that when we become weary, we start to lash out at people around us, right? We get grouchy and grumpy. We say, don't talk to me until I get my cup of coffee, right? It's our excuse to be mean. It affects our relationships when we're tired. There are many times when I've been talking or sitting in class talking to someone, and I realize I haven't heard the thing that they've been saying for the last 2 minutes because I've been spacing out because I'm so exhausted. So this weariness affects our relationships. It's not just a physical thing. It's an emotional thing. It's a spiritual thing. It's a mental thing. It affects all of our lives. And here's one of the problems, right? Our culture doesn't really do a good job of kind of answering it. In America, actually, this is kind of a global issue. But in America, our work culture is success-oriented, right? It's all about the drive to succeed, to achieve, to accomplish things. And there are expectations for that. You're expected, if you want to be successful, if you want to climb the ladder, you've got to put in the hours, right? You got to go above and beyond what is required of you in order to get that raise so that you can provide for your family, in order to get that prestige and that honor and that glory. So this is one of the only commands in the 10 Commandments that our culture actively, and even us in the church, we actively reward breaking it. If I kill someone and break the Sabbath, break the command, do not murder, I'll go to jail, right? If I steal something, there are consequences for that. If I preach a God besides Jesus Christ, I should get fired, right? I should be thrown out of the church. You should not listen to me when I preach that, according to these commandments. But when it comes to the Sabbath and working, we applaud those who put in those extra hours. We applaud those who are always available. We applaud those who go above and beyond to work. And a study recently showed, just published in May, that this is a global crisis, this overworking. And more and more people are actually dying from overworked related conditions, from stroke and heart attacks and things like that. More people are dying from overwork than from malaria. This is a global problem, right? And we feel it in our culture. So that there are things that are fighting against us having rest and enjoying the Sabbath day. So there's an aspect of this that's really difficult. But we can see that God had a plan in place. This is thousands of years ago. God had a plan in place set for us because he knew, this commandment is the only command that begins with the word remember. Remember the Sabbath day. And that might be because God knew we'd be so quick to forget it and to leave it behind. But it goes against the way we operate as human beings to skip out on it, right? God created us with this rhythm of work and rest, and work and rest. And so this is why we need to make the Sabbath holy. What does it mean to make something holy? To be holy means to be set apart for a purpose, right? To be set apart for a specific purpose. And so the Sabbath day is supposed to be a day of a different kind of time, a different way to spend your life that is not the same as when you work. And so in order to make it holy, we need to set it apart and to guard it from corruption, from being intruded upon by work or other things. And the pandemic has made it pretty difficult, right? Because a lot of us are working from home now. I'm not working from home, but my wife works from home. And she had a job last year where the work culture in her workplace was pretty toxic. And so she was an assistant. She would get home from work, and then her boss would text her or email her or call her at 7 p.m., 8 p.m., 10 p.m., even 11 p.m. regarding tasks that needed to be done, or saying, hey, remember to do this. Hey, remember we have this tomorrow. Heads up. And so the pandemic and working from home has kind of blurred the boundaries between work and home life. So it's become a lot easier to answer that text, to read that email, 10 p.m., 11 p.m., before bed. And it's gotten our screens in front of our faces, making us tired in its own right. So here's our first application point for this. If we want to set apart a Sabbath day, the first thing we need to do is realize our limits. Realize your limits. You got to name the problem, right? You're not going to solve the problem if you don't name it. We're tired. There's something wrong with the way we're functioning, always going, always moving. There needs to be something to change. We have to name it. Realize your limits. You're not meant to do everything, and you're not meant to do everything all the time. And then second, decide on a Sabbath day. Look at your week. Look at your week and see where can you make room for a Sabbath day. Where can you make room for a time to rest? And then how can you guard it and truly cease and stop from work? Okay, so that's our first step. Don't worry, I know there are probably lots of like, hey, Zach, but this, but we'll get there eventually, hopefully. So the question is raised, if we keep the Sabbath, if we set it apart and make it holy, if we realize our limits, what makes the Sabbath different from a typical day off from work, right? Is it just a day off? Do we do the normal things we do on a day off from work, on a break or on vacation? Once again, our work culture will say that rest is for the sake of efficiency, right? You rest so that you can be rejuvenated, to go back into work and be more productive. That's the purpose of breaks. That's the purpose of rest, is to get back into work and get those results out. But this command says something different. We work in order to rest. Our work moves towards rest, not rest towards work. So God gives us a very different reason to rest. And I think that understanding the reasons that he gives are some of the most beautiful things about Sabbath. Some of the most beautiful things that we miss. So our second point is this. We should set apart a Sabbath day to rest and delight in God's creation. We should set apart a Sabbath day to rest and delight in God's creation. The reason that God gives in this command to rest, he roots it in his own act of creation. So in verse 11, he says, "For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea and all that is in them. But he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy." So God himself rested after completing his work of creation, and then he blessed that day. And so that immediately brings up the question, if there's this parallel between our work and rest and God's work and rest, does that mean that God gets tired and that's why he rested? What is the reason that God rested? Some would say that God rested in order to set us an example to live our lives, right? So that we could talk about the Sabbath like we're doing today. Because God set this example, we should also follow in that example. And I think that's part of the truth, right? We want to imitate God in this pattern of work and rest. But that doesn't go far enough, I think. So if Sabbath is rooted in God's act of creation, we need to go to Genesis chapter 1. We're actually we're not going to read it, but I'll summarize. Genesis chapter 1, to the account of creation, and see what it is that brought God to rest. So in Genesis, God sets out to create the world, and he starts with light and darkness. So he creates light, and so there's light and there's darkness. And at the end of the day, it says, "Behold, God looked at everything he made, and he saw that it was good," the first day. And then the second day, he creates more things. And then the third day and fourth day, he creates the sea. He separates the sea from land. He creates the sky. He fills those things with birds and things that swim in the sea and with vegetation. And after each day, at the end of the day, there's this constant refrain. God saw all that he made, and behold, it was good. But then on the sixth day was a special day because God created animals and he created human beings. Some people say that God did that so that it would humble humankind, so that we would say, we don't get our own day. We were made with the animals, so we're not too high above them. But at the end of the sixth day, when God made human, like man and woman in his image, it says that God saw all that he made, and behold, it was very good. Not only was it good, it was very good. It was not only beautiful, it was exceedingly beautiful. There was something special that came at the end in the sixth day, at the end of the rest, at the end of the work, right? So he creates all of this, the whole world, and then on the seventh day, he rests. And I think that what that tells us is that Not that God was tired, he was worn out from creating the whole world. I think that God rested in the goodness of creation, in the beauty of all that he made. God rested in and delighted in human beings and in animals and in the vegetation and in the things that he made. We look out and we travel and we see these beautiful mountains and trees and animals and things like that. And we experience sunrise and sunset. And we see, oh man, this is so beautiful. And I think maybe God was doing that too. Just delighting in what he made and delighting in his relationship with man and woman. So that tells us that there's something very good to be enjoyed. That the Sabbath is not just meant for physical refreshment, but the Sabbath is meant for good things. The Sabbath is meant for us to join God in delighting in creation. Sabbath is meant to bring life to us, like true life, not just awakeness, not just productivity, but life. It's the day that we enjoy God's life. And not only that, but Sabbath is meant to be enjoyed with those around us, right? And at the end of verse 10, it goes through this whole list of everyone who's also supposed to enjoy the Sabbath. Your son and daughter, your male and female servants, your animals. That's kind of weird, right? Your animals need to rest. And your foreigner. In other words, the foreigner means someone who is not from among you and who doesn't believe the same way you do. So this rest is meant to be enjoyed by the community. So the question comes, if we want to say that Sabbath is something that's sweet, then what does actual Sabbath practice look like for us? How do we actually enjoy and enjoy life and delight in creation on the Sabbath day? There's this, I heard someone speaking on this the other day, and they shared one of their practices of Sabbath. One thing that they do with their family, they observe it on Saturday. And so in the morning, what they do is they get up as a family and they make a big pancake breakfast. Pancake and bacon and all this stuff. And so he shared that there's a Jewish tradition concerning the Sabbath where the father would wake up before everyone else in the family and he'd prepare spoons full of honey. So that when the kids wake up, the first thing they do is they go and they get the spoonful of honey. And it's meant to remind the kids that the Sabbath is sweet. The Sabbath is something to be enjoyed. So they would go all their lives with that memory. The first thing we did was get that honey. And it would remind them of the sweetness of the Sabbath. And so, instead of honey, this person I was listening to used maple syrup. And it was a time to gather with the family and to enjoy the sweetness, the deliciousness of God's creation. And I would say that's a great thing to do on the Sabbath. So here's what I'd say. Here's some advice for an application. If we want to enjoy God's creation and delight in it, find out what really, really, truly brings you and your family life and joy. So sit down by yourself with a sheet of paper and just list, what are the things that bring me joy and give life to me? That don't drain me but refill me. And have people in your family do it too. And then come together and say, hey, what did you think of? What did you think of? And then when you have that list of life-giving things, fill your Sabbath with them. So it could be taking a nap. This is how my wife and I celebrate the Sabbath, or part of it. She sleeps in, and my body, for some reason, doesn't let me sleep in. So I get up early while she sleeps. And I just go into the living room, and I'm an introvert, so it's actually really good for me. I get my quiet time, my alone time. I do devotions, I read, and then when Victory gets up, she does things, and then we come together, and one of us or both of us make breakfast or lunch if she sleeps that long. Hey, but it's a Sabbath day, right? It's a Sabbath. You enjoy rest. You could watch movies. You could play board games together, go on a walk, go out into nature and enjoy what God has made. And enjoy what God has made. So on the Sabbath, first, we cease from work. We don't let work crowd in. And then we rest and we delight in the goodness of God's creation. But there's still something more for us to talk about. What makes this day different from every other day? Is it just about figuring out how to fill ourselves with as much pleasure as possible? When I sit down with my paper, do I just write down a list of things I like? Do I write down binge Netflix again? Do I write 6 hours of video games? What is it? Is it just pleasure? Or is there something more? And I would say that there's something more that we have to say. That leads us to our third point. That we should set apart a Sabbath day as worship to God. We should set apart a Sabbath day as worship to God. In verse 11, at the end, or sorry, not in verse 11. In verse 10, it says, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God, or for the Lord your God. So the Sabbath, remember, this is all taking place in the context of relationship with God, all these commandments. And the first couple commandments all had to do with the way that God's people related to God. So there was a command that God is the only God that they're allowed to worship, right? He's the only true God, so he's the one that they should have a relationship with. Another command was don't make idols, right? Don't make idols and put them in the place of God. Another command was do not bear God's name in vain. Do not represent God poorly. So this is and then from there we go into our fourth commandment, which is keep this day of rest. And it's meant to be a rest for or to the Lord your God. So this isn't just a normal day. It's not just a normal day off. It's not just a day where you get to laze around and do nothing. The day is meant as worship to God. So the things we fill our day with should be delightful. I'm a strong supporter of that, right? A lot of us have been taught in our childhoods or things like that the Sabbath day, it's the Lord's day. So you better not run. You better not run. You better not sing too loudly. You better not cook on the Sabbath. There are all these rules, right, that we associate with the Sabbath. But when Jesus came and he was confronted about the Sabbath by the Pharisees who had all these rules around the Sabbath, Jesus said, look, man was not made for the Sabbath. Sabbath was made for the man, right? For the human being, for man and woman. So the Sabbath is not meant to be something that we enslave ourselves to in a legalistic way. You know, it's not supposed to be full of rules of things we can't do. It's meant to be a day of freedom and enjoyment and celebration, but in the context of our relationship with God. Everything on the Sabbath day is kind of angled towards God as an act of worship. What does it mean to worship? It means to ascribe or acknowledge worth to someone or something of which they are worthy. So we saying today, you are worthy of it all, right? That's us worshiping God, telling him, God, you are worthy of it all. You're worthy of praise and honor and glory and power. You're worthy of these things. And we acknowledge that and we submit ourselves to that. So in the same way, when we come to the Sabbath to delight in God's creation and to delight in our relationship with him, we do the same thing. We submit our day to God and make sure that everything we're doing on that day is honoring to him. So does that mean you got to pray for 3 hours? Does that mean you got to sing worship songs? It could. I would suggest that you should pray. You should find a way to actually verbally express your worship to God. But it doesn't have to be just that. It could be more than that. It's a chance that we get to contemplate our relationship with God and to acknowledge the goodness, the sweetness of his creation. So it's not just a list of what are the things that I like. I'm going to fill my day with that. And here's an illustration that might show why that could be bad. When I was in high school, I ran in a track and field. I have really long legs, so my event was hurdles. I could get over them pretty easily. And so one day, I'm from California, in the hot California sun, I was practicing for this track and field event. And this dry California sun was beating down on me, but I had forgotten my water that day. So I went through the whole practice, and I was thirsty. I was parched. I needed some water. The normal thing would have been for me to go and ask a friend to drink their water, but I was pretty awkward, and even that was past my comfort zone. So I just let myself sit in the thirst. And then after practice, some high schoolers in our church, we started this Bible study that I was going to go to. And this day we were going to do like a celebration day. We were going to eat food, play games, and just hang out. And so I had practice 2 hours in the hot sun, running constantly without water. Then a 30-minute drive to get to the house. And then so when I got there, I was thirsty, and I ran in, and the first place I went was the ice cooler. And I went in, and I grabbed the Dr. Pepper, and I opened it, guzzled it down. I was like, oh man, I'm so thirsty though. So I grab another one, guzzle it down. But I'm still not satisfied, so I grab another. This one was probably a Sprite, I think. I remember Sprite that day. It's kind of blurred. But I drank that, and then for dinner, we had pizza, and then for dessert, we had like brownies or something, right? So I'm filling my body with all this junk. And that night, my body just absolutely crashed. I crashed. And that actually was the last day that I ever drank soda. It's been years. I was traumatized a little bit. So, what this illustrates for us is that what I did is I felt a need, right? I felt a longing for something, and I went to the thing that was available, and I went to the thing that I enjoyed, which was Dr. Pepper, and I drank it. And I drank it, and I drank it, and I filled myself, and I indulged myself on what I enjoyed. But it wasn't what was good for me, and it wasn't what I needed. So in the same way, if we're not careful, when we try to fill our day with the celebration of the goodness of God's creation and in our relationship with Him, we can accidentally fill ourselves, or maybe even on purpose, fill our time with the things that are not good for us, with the indulgences that we want to make ourselves feel better. So we binge Netflix, so we do all these things. So we have our screens on all day, 8-hour screen time. But the Sabbath is meant to be a day of worship. So in one sense, we trust. We look at God and say, God, you are good, and your creation is good, and my family is good, and I'm going to enjoy what you have for me and for our community. But a second way to trust God, right? This is maybe something that's been working in your guys' minds as I've been speaking. A way that we engage, the way that we worship on the Sabbath day is by trusting in God that we can take a Sabbath day in the first place, right? Some of us have a lot of worries when it comes to work. And there are a couple different people that we could address. So there's one type of person today who you might say, Zach, this sounds really great. I'd love to have a day off, but there's just too much to do. There's just too much to do, and I have to work to get it done. I have to get that raise. I have to move up the ladder. Or I just have to keep my job. And so I'd say this to that kind of people, that kind of person. First of all, that's the Sabbath is a radical act of trust in God's ability to provide and a submission of our own power to do that for ourselves. We submit our attempt to make everything right and everything fine by our own effort. And we trust God to provide for us. And we say, God, it's yours. So, there might be some practical things you could do. Maybe you look at your work week and you say, am I overcommitted Did I say yes to too many things? Do I need to learn how to say no? Is it that you spent your time poorly during the week and didn't steward your time to complete the work that God had for you? Maybe you need to reassess whether the work that you're doing is what God intends for you in the first place. So that's one type of person. The other type of person is one that I really relate to. Some of you might be saying, I would like to take a rest, but I don't even think that I couldn't pay my bills if I took a day of rest. Some of us are working 2 to 3 jobs so that we can just provide for our families. And it's difficult, and it really deserves its own lengthy discussion, but I'll keep it short. And I just invite you in the same way that, first of all, like I said, the Sabbath is a radical act of trust and obedience that God will provide for you. It's putting things in God's hand and saying that it's not all on me. So one of the things to ask is, what is it that compels you to work always in any of your situation? What is it that compels you to work always? Is it your need to be successful? Are you putting your trust in work rather than God? And then to respond to those with saying the Sabbath day is an act of worship in which I show God that I trust him. That I trust him. And the thing is, none of us are perfect at keeping Sabbath, right? There will be texts that we get. There will be boundaries that slip from time to time. And here's the thing. If we operate on the idea that Sabbath is a strict command that we must obey all these rules in order to keep, then we're going to fail and we're going to feel shame and then we're going to give up. So I'll tell you this. The Sabbath, this day of rest, is not a time for shame and not a time of perfection. Because what do you do if you behave in that way? I must do this in order to keep a good Sabbath. You're making yourself work on the Sabbath to keep the Sabbath, right? You're subverting the very purpose of it all. And so, have grace for yourself. And take baby steps. Start out small. Some of our lives are not built in a way that accommodates the Sabbath right now. So we need to work towards it. Some of us can't even imagine how we can do this. But here's the thing. Maybe you just need to start with 1 hour on Friday night. Maybe you're a single mother with 3 kids. And that's the time where they're in bed early enough and you don't have as much to do and you could just sit. Maybe you just start with an hour. But guard that hour. Make it an act of worship. Cease from your work. Don't fold laundry unless you really enjoy folding laundry. Don't do dishes, but find what brings you joy. Find what brings you joy in your relationship with God that connects you to him. It's an act of intimacy. But I think that if you start this and you guard it well, that you'll see that observing the Sabbath can be a life-giving thing, can be something that rejuvenates you, not just so that you can be productive, but so you could bring life into the rest of your days, right? People who observe the Sabbath live all 6 days, all 7 days differently. It's not just about the Sabbath day. So I think you'll start thinking, oh man, this hour was so good. I want it to go longer. So you say, oh, why can't it be 2 hours? Oh, why can't it be 5 hours? Why can't I have 6 hours? Why can't I have a day? Why can't this just be how it is? Why can't I just always be this way? But one day, that longing is a taste for what is coming, which is the Sabbath rest that God brings in the new creation, in the new heavens, in the new earth. Because Jesus Christ, when he came to earth, in his last week, he went to Jerusalem, and he had a lot to do. He cleansed the temple. He had people, Pharisees and scribes, coming up to him and challenging him. He had people mocking him. He had people worshiping him. He had his own followers pressuring him to come in as the Messiah and conquer the Roman people that were over the Israelite people. So he's being pressured to do this, to do that, to do this, to succeed, to achieve, to accomplish. But what did he do? Jesus, for 6 days, he did his work in Jerusalem. And then he was crucified. And even on the cross, what were the soldiers saying? If you're the Messiah, come down off the cross, save yourself, do something. And he didn't realize that Jesus staying on the cross was him doing the work that God had for him. And then he gave up his life so that he could defeat the sin that we are fighting with so constantly, that drains us and brings us weariness. And then what did Jesus do? He rested in a tomb. And then on Sunday, he rose again, and with his rising, he brought new life. He brought new life to bring to his people new life that meant everlasting rest. New life that meant rest is not about a place or an activity. Rest is about a person. And so as believers, when we take our rest, when we enjoy our Sabbath, we do so knowing that it is Jesus Christ who saved us from the sin of overworking, who saved us from the weariness of needing to overwork, and saved us into new life that we will enjoy forever. So, friends and family, Sabbath day is not just a command, it's a taste of eternity. It's a taste of what's to come. And it's a taste of new life that we enjoy. So I encourage you, remember the Sabbath to keep it holy. And I think it'll bring about a whole change that affects your entire life. So let's pray. Dear Lord, we thank you for moments to rest. Lord, we thank you that we can gather on Sunday, which has become for so many Christians the new day of Sabbath rest, that we observe it, Lord, that we're able to come and rest in community to worship you. Lord, thank you for providing us a way to enjoy and delight in your goodness and to worship you in that, Lord. Help us to observe it, to guard it, to communicate boundaries to people, to take these practical steps to have a Sabbath. But Lord, help us to always remember that this Sabbath is new life in you. And Lord, if there's anyone here who has not experienced that new life by committing their lives to you as their Savior and Lord, I pray that you would speak to them now and bring them to that decision, to join the family of God, to enter into rest for their weary souls. And now with our heads bowed and with our eyes still closed, and as the worship team comes up, if you're sitting in here and you have never made that decision to become a follower of Jesus, to enter into this rest, this restful relationship, I invite you to do so. And if you look around where you are, if you're one of those people who wants to make that decision, and you want to communicate that to someone, I would encourage you to do so. So you can come up here to the altar, and you can speak with me, and we can talk and talk more about what that means, or you can find an usher who's waiting around to speak with them. But I encourage you, if you're weary and you're longing for rest, don't keep working. Enter into the rest. For the rest of us, if you'd like to come to the altar and bow and pray to the Lord, I invite you to do so. But I invite you to make a commitment for you and your families to begin this observance of a Sabbath day of rest, reminding yourselves of the work that Jesus did for us. So Lord, bless us as we go about this week. Help us to do our work faithfully and do it well. Help our work to be an act of worship. But Lord, help us to come to a point where we observe a day of rest, and help us to guard it faithfully and to honor you with it. In your name we pray. Amen.